Morning, Jennifer. Call roll for us, please.
Thing. For the State Treasurer, Mr. Warris. Controller Yi. Mr. Rosensteel. Ms. Higa. Ms. Yamamoto. Ms. Hendricks. Ms. Vargas. And for the Director of Finance, Ms. Wong Hernandez. Chairperson Dillon, you have a quorum.
Thank you very much. So we're going to go into closed session. I don't think we have anybody from the public here. Oh, yes, we do.
Yeah, we do.
We're going to go back to 9 o'clock this morning.
It feels like it was just yesterday.
Knowing that we were going into closed session and wanting to get the meeting started, we started with approving our, we opened an open session, went into closed session, and then I realized we hadn't even improved our agenda yet. So we actually approved our agenda with flexibility, but we were in closed session when we did that. So we need to approve our agenda with flexibility in open session, and then we'll move on to what we did in closed session. So I'd entertain a motion. Nora has approved, and Karen has seconded. All in favor of our flexible agenda, say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. Any abstentions? Okay, thank you, Brian. Now we are definitely official. So we have met for a very long time today already in closed session. We only have one action item coming out of that. The board would like to.
Sounds like we didn't do anything.
No. Only one action item, though. The board would like to form an ad hoc subcommittee to work with the CEO, CIO, and other necessary staff on the process of refreshing our executive staff search firm pool. I'd entertain a motion.
So moved.
Sharon has moved, and Nora has seconded to approve that ad hoc committee. Is there any further discussion or questions? All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. Any abstentions? All righty, we will do that. If you want to serve on that committee, please get me your intent by tomorrow. How's that? All righty. So moving on, Lisa, I'll turn this over to you so we can get our speakers from Stanford out.
Thank you, and good afternoon. We have the pleasure today of presenting findings from the Retirement Readiness Assessment. And this year we had the honor of partnering with researchers at Stanford to do a companion piece of research alongside of the Retirement Readiness Assessment. And because our guests are on a schedule, we're going to have them cover the findings of their companion piece first, and then we'll circle back and cover the Retirement Readiness Assessment. So we have with us today Jalou Streeter and Reese Gwynn, and Tom is going to make formal introductions.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I want to tell a quick story about how we came to partner with the Stanford Center on Longevity. This goes back to your October 2016 offsite. You may recall Dr. Laura Carstensen came and spoke to you about her research around longevity. And we approached her after that meeting. We were certainly very impressed with what she had to say. And we said, can we partner with you to study our teachers together? And then we can share what we learned about our teachers with one another. She was very interested in that, and our timing was serendipitous because we were coming up on the retirement readiness year, and so Stanford was able to develop a set of questions that they added to our retirement readiness assessment that teachers could take when they finished with our survey. So they're here today to talk about the results of the teachers that responded to their questions. And I'm going to introduce our speakers. They have impressive bios, but I'm just going to read a few of the highlights here. So as Lisa mentioned, to her left is Jalou Streeter. She's interested in development, macroeconomics, and the effects of public policy on economic growth, wealth, distribution, and welfare. She has her master's and PhD from the University of Indiana at Bloomington, and she's an avid piano player. And then to her left is Reese Gwynn. His main research interest involves the motivation of older workers and their contribution of older workers to the workplace, as well as age differences in work preferences. And Reese has worked for over 20 years in investment banking based in London and Sydney. He's a former managing director at Goldman Sachs, and where he was the co-head of the securities division in Australia and New Zealand. And more recently, Reese was head of financial markets for Investec Bank, He holds a master's degree from Johns Hopkins and a master's of philosophy of science, public policy from the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard. So they have some fascinating things to tell you about our teachers, and I'll let them take it from here.
And, thank you very much for having us today. And I apologize, I guess, on our behalf, you've changed the schedule for us, so we do appreciate it. Is that okay? So we're going to take you through, as Alyssa said, the survey is really a piggyback on the Retirement Readiness Assessment Survey. And so respondents were given a chance to answer the Stanford survey. We'll take you through really the key sections. It's a little bit disjointed. Most of the sections are around retirement and expectations about retirement. We also added on some information around the Sightlines Project, which is an ongoing project at the Center on Longevity, and we'll get to that in a minute. I guess I am clicking, I apologize here, so that's what that said. So just a quick snapshot of the demographics of the sample, which you can see there. A little bit more than half are actually retired educators and administrators, I should add. The gender split is primarily women, and most of the respondents are educators versus administrative staff. So we are started with a question about an ideal, I say in quotations, ideal retirement age. And some of the respondents, I'm going to ask Xiaolu to help us out on this, some of the respondents were given a primer, which is now a very common device used in psychology, but I thought it'd be useful to explain. We actually wrote the whole primer out here, but
Yes, so priming is a technology, a technique that used widely in psychology nowadays, where we expose the participants one stimulus that will affect the response to a subsequent stimulus without conscious guidance or intention. So in this survey, we showed half of our participants randomly selected participants, this very simple paragraph. Life expectancy increased by 30 years in the 20th century. So after this primer, then we ask the teacher participants what their ideal age of retiring is. And our results are very interesting. Teachers, in particular, the younger female ones, will plan their retirement very differently if they have read this very simple paragraph. So I will let Reese to go over the details.
so here we have a graph. So I think you've read that primer, so you've all actually been primed yourselves, which is good. The data shows, just as Xiaolu was alluding to, the data shows that among the different age cohorts, first of all, it was only significant for the sub 45. We broke it into 4 major age cohorts. Sub 45 group found it was significant, i.e. the difference between the yeses, i.e. those who got the primer and those who didn't get the primer, that difference was significant. For the other age cohorts, it wasn't significant. And similarly, you can't really tell from the graph, I apologize, but it is significant for women, those who received the primer and those who didn't, that difference. So that was an interesting finding. It was one of the first times we'd used the primer. This wasn't necessarily part of the survey, this graph. We thought it was interesting looking at the data that this graph shows that it's not really relevant on the younger years, but at almost every age cohort surveyed, women are more likely proportionally to be retired than men across the whole spectrum.
So Reese, can you go back to the primer, please?
Yeah.
So you said that it's the interaction between the primer and gender was significant, and also with the under 45. But what was the significance? That
Yeah.
that they would work longer, or that
Yeah. So that their ideal retirement age was longer. Once they read the primer, the ideal retirement age was longer. So I think the primer is there to really reinforce the fact that life is long and longer than it certainly has been throughout human history. And that caused a significant increase in that ideal retirement age between those who received the primer and those who didn't. So I should
and that was the
clarify
group
that.
for under 45, and then women. Is it all women or just that group?
Just for women, it doesn't mean that men weren't necessarily prime, but the difference, the means between the yeses and the
Right.
nos, those who got it and those who didn't, wasn't significant.
So women thought they would work longer then, that had the prior. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure. I
No,
understood
no,
all
it's,
that.
it's a very good point.
Harry?
It's actually on that point, and I don't want to belabor it, but I want to make sure I get it correct. So people who see that primer,
Yes.
women in particular,
Yes.
change decision, make a different decision based upon that information.
They extended the ideal retirement age relative to those who had not seen the primer.
So if one wanted to increase the likelihood that people would increase the amount of time that they worked, it would be helpful if they had that information.
Yep, I'm not making a policy recommendation. But it had that impact.
You know,
It had that
I make
impact.
the assumption that everybody knows that.
Yeah,
That life
absolutely.
expectancy, not only is it increasing, but it's increasing, it increased by 30 years in one century. In the previous century, life expectancy increased by how many years?
Well, at the turn of the 19th century, life expectancy, and this is admittedly for white men in the United States, was 47 years old. So, most of this room would be dead. And it would be, and it increased.
Some are.
So, if you think about all of human history, it took all of human history to double life expectancy, and then it took another 100 years to double it again. And I think Laura would have underscored that when you saw her some years ago. But that change is dramatic in human history, and I think that we take a bit for granted. But I think reinforcing that fact has had some impact, and we are indeed living longer. Or more of us are, if you will, reaching the finish line. That's what's happening. So you're seeing many more people live longer.
Yeah, we think this is a very interesting point because we only show the participants once and this very simple paragraph. And think about the effect, what the effect would be if we show them the life expectancy, the increasing life expectancy many times or more frequently, and ask them to think about the future and then plan their retirement accordingly. So we feel that could be a future research direction that we can build into the future survey questions.
Did you want to talk about expected? So this just briefly then on expected. So we actually looked at the mean retirement age. As I pointed out in terms of the sample, a bit more than half of the sample is already retired, and that average age is just about 62. And then expected age. So we're making a distinction between expected and ideal. The expected age among both educators and administrators is 64. And then you can see that difference. This is looking at all respondents, so primed and not primed. And they make that distinction between is 62.14 versus 62.5.
Right. Yeah, so I just want to make a distinction here. So this question is aiming at finding out generational differences in retirement age and planning. So here we have two concepts. One is expected, one is ideal. So these two are very different concepts. I may ideally want to retire at 55, but I realize the reality, I have to retire at 65. So the 65 will be my expected age of retiring, and the 55 will be my ideal. So here, our active teachers, based on the data, active teachers say they expect to retire at 64, while in comparison, the retired teachers, their actual retired age was 61.9. And the two numbers don't look very different, but they're statistically different. And so that means what? That means our active teachers, they are expecting to retire at a much later age than the current retired teachers. And to put it in a simple way, that out of 760 active teachers, about half of them said they will expect to retire at 65 or later. So that's our data.
We then moved on to recording feelings and emotions around retirement. So the
Reese, I'm sorry.
Would you prefer to wait until they finish their presentation?
What would you prefer?
no, jump in. Go ahead. Honest to God.
Go ahead, Harry.
We'll go back to that slide, one before that. So teachers, teachers, active teachers expect to retire at 64,
Yes.
but they're actually retiring at 62.
The ones who, in the
Who are
sample, who have, because they're already retired, and their actual mean age is 62.
But when they're working, they're saying, I'm going to work till 64. Then they make a decision, and they actually retire at 62. Why?
We don't know. Could be. So that's a really good question. Yeah.
Here's,
He's got a lot of those.
I'm asking, I think this
Yeah.
potentially has important ramifications.
Yeah.
There's a lot, I think, that can be learned from that. My experience tells me that, why do teachers retire at that age? One is they're really tired, that it takes a lot of energy to teach. And even if you stay healthy, et cetera, managing a high school classroom. Secondly, is if they've been teaching long enough, they can do the math and they have enough service credit, et cetera, that economically, it doesn't make sense for them to continue to work in a job, even if they love it, because it's exhausting. If they actually did work until 64, either in the same capacity, or we looked at how teachers later in their career could be used in a system, which is a larger policy conversation, but what would it mean to, like, actuarial numbers, what it would do for funding status. So that slide, I think, is worthy of, at some point, I don't know when, is worthy of additional exploration and input from policy makers, because people actually want to teach until 64. They're telling us that, but they're retiring at 62. It affects the balance sheet of CalSTRS. It has implications for society, jobs. So that's it.
I think there could be many reasons to answer that question, but I can probably offer two. I think it could be an age effect, or it could be a cohort effect. If it's an age effect, then I think I'm going to retire at 64 when I'm answering that question at age 30. But when I get to 60, I'm saying, no, I'm done. So that's an age effect. Or it could be a cohort effect. It could be just the younger teachers, they behave in a completely different way than the older teachers. They say, well, nowadays we want to work longer. And I don't know which one is.
And these are all our members. Okay.
And we know what the N is, like how many respondents?
Just under 2,000 respondents.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so moving on to, we recorded some feelings around retirement. So this is a 5-point scale. We asked educators and administrators to, and some of them it's retroactive because they are indeed retired, but it's to ask them about their feelings around retirement. And so there are words like how excited you are on a scale of 1 to 5, how happy, concerned, et cetera. And by and large, the women, this is the gender difference, women showed more intense feelings around these responses. So more excited, but also more concerned, happier, but also sadder. Everyone seemed to be the same as far as board goes. Actually, we should, sorry about that. And then men were, especially around concern, were significantly less concerned and around the prospect of retirement. That's what it looks like on the graph. So the graph shows certainly concerned. There's quite a significant gap between men and women, and then you can see the other feelings. I just threw this in because I was reading a book recently called The Longevity Economy, but the MIT Age Lab did a study that was a pilot study a couple of years ago, which is similar. And there was a bit of overlap with what we showed, but they found that, and I quoted directly, it's quite an interesting book, but that male participants were approaching old age with a fuzzy, optimistic mindset, while women were coming to it with much more precise conception of the challenges of later life. Men were looking forward to relaxing a few decades. Women were planning to grow old. And I thought, so there's a lot more behind that study, but I thought that was interesting that there was an overlap. That's a can of worms, but
And that was all done from photographs?
it was done from, they put the photographs up on a graph to use
Right.
which photographs best represented their feelings.
Right.
Now, here they were only happy, so it was a little bit different from ours, but I thought that sense of how realistic they were about
Right.
retirement was an interesting finding. I'll just move on. Sorry, what's that?
Yeah, I just want to mention a little bit about the concerns, the feeling of concern here. So just now, Reese was comparing what men and women in terms of their feelings about retirement. And we also actually found something about the feelings, but this is in comparing retired versus active teachers. So one question in the administrative data, they ask retired and active teachers whether they are concerned about the financial situations. In particular, there are 4 questions. And so 4 questions are able to maintain their standard of living in retirement, being able to afford medical expenses in retirement, Social Security will have sufficient funds to pay my benefit, CalSTRS will have sufficient funds to pay my benefits. So those are the 4 concerns. And in the data, we found that retired groups are just expressed much, much less concerned about those financial aspects. And this, we think, is very, very interesting because the natural question is why the active teachers are concerned more about their finance in the future. That could be, possibly could be just they're worried about future because the future is not here yet. But it could also be that they're not prepared enough. So if the second possibility is true, then we probably should get people more in shape in their finance.
Yeah, and then so just related to that, then by and large, those already retired were much happier, of course, and excited than those. I say, of course. And that's what it looks like on the graph. So you can see the difference. You can see how much more concerned the active staff are relative to the retired staff. And that's the most pronounced. Okay. So now we get on a section of flexibility, and we'll unpack this for you just a little bit. So the question was phrased really as a trade-off. So it's what we asked respondents what the appeal of certain flexibility measures, and we look at different ones, is relative to working longer. So it's really a way to gauge the strength of that appeal in the same sense as if I say to you, how much do you want $5 versus how long would you stand in line for that $5? It's that trade-off will elicit those preferences more. And what was interesting, just by way of summary, is that the younger cohort of sub-45s were the only group that showed really any kind of significant appeal across the board. And we'll take you, well, I'll just quickly what I mean by flexibility. It's widely discussed. It's widely discussed across private and public sector, but here it was meant primarily around a flexible time, so a compressed week or different hours and shifts. We also look at part-time. We don't look at a concept of a flexible place, which is telecommuting, which may not lend itself so easily to educators. And then secondly, we look at ideas of, some people call it career flexibility, career development, and how important that is to educators. So we'll go through that. So the first one is just the standard flexibility. And again, on the left-hand side, the only group that found it more appealing than not was the sub-45 age cohort. I'm going to sort of move through these. Here's part-time. Nobody thought part-time was more appealing. Now that may be an economic decision, but that was very pronounced across the board in every age cohort. So remember, of course, for those already retired, they're answering the question somewhat retroactively. So that's a little bit different. They're saying, had you had part-time work, would that have changed the decision? And so we need to make sure that people understand they're looking at it retroactively. I put phased retirement in here, so this is a concept of gradual transition, which I think is very, very much discussed now, really across the country, in all walks of life and all industries. So here it was more appealing to the sub-45 cohort, it was also more appealing to that, to the between 60 and 70 cohort as well. And so here, of course, there are limitations in a lot of industries. I was talking to my sister Louise is a teacher in Toronto. From Canada originally, and she has reached her rule of 90. She's got her years, but she would like to have a phased retirement situation, and they can't. So she has to retire, and she can maybe come back as a supply teacher, but she doesn't have the ability to work, say, 2 or 3 days a week. And so that's something that, of course, she's an anecdote, and the plural of anecdote is data, but she would love to have that kind of ability to phase. And I thought that was interesting finding anyway, in terms of the appeal.
Yeah, in terms of the phased retirement, I just want to draw your attention to look at the bars. There are so many bars here, okay? But the first group of bars is sub-45, the youngest the teachers. The second group of bars are between 45 and 60. The third group of bars are 60 to 70. And the last one is 70 plus age group. And so we looked at how, what's the percentage of people who say, yes, I would love to have phased retirement. But look at how interesting, for the youngest group, a lot of them say, yes, I would love to have phased retirement. And then for the next age group, people between 45 and 60, the people, percentage say yes dropped by a lot. But then look at the next one. People between 60 and 70, now they say, oh, I love it. I would love to have it. I would like to have phased retirement. So this is non-monotonic relationship between their answers and the age. And why do we have that? I think that deserves some further digging.
We looked at holidays. I certainly don't think of that as a flexibility measure in the workplace, but we did ask, and no age cohort wanted more holidays in exchange for working longer. Yeah. Yep. So then the second category, as I said, is that sense of career flexibility. So we only had 2 measures here, but one was so professional development, actual training, and then the concept of a workplace sabbatical as well. So here, so broadly, professional development, you had slightly more appeal again in that sub-45 cohort, but not in the others. And then also the sabbatical. So we did look at a different measure of sabbaticals, which I think was too confusing. It was a five 1-year sabbaticals. This was just a 1-year sabbatical. And again, strong appeal among that youngest cohort, which I thought was interesting. We looked at part-time versus full-time just by itself, in other words. So this question wasn't as a trade-off, as you saw in the last section. So here, as you might expect, you have, as respondents get older, they choose to have much more part-time. And then there's this weird blip in the 45 to 54 category where they had no interest in part-time. So I sort of struggled to explain. Maybe that's an economic decision, perhaps, I'm not sure.
Yeah, this is another non-monotonic relationship between the people's answers and their age.
So looking at doing some background research, I'm a little out of my depth, but I did find it interesting. There was a number of pieces I found, particularly from the Learning Policy Institute, about educator shortage in California, and particularly around STEM and special ed. And I think some of these data are relevant to this discussion. I thought it was also interesting. This is, I'm sure, old news to you, but new to me, that most of the turnover, of course, comes in the first 5 years of educator work life, and that's not dissimilar to other industries, certainly. And then again, that the overlap with some of the appeal of some of these measures in the youngest cohort, I thought was relevant, but I only just wanted to flag it. It's not something I wanted to dwell on, but I thought it was interesting. It had interesting implications. Okay, so we're doing okay for time. The last section, again, this is the social engagement and healthy living, really draws on this ongoing project called Sightlines, which with the Center of Longevity has been pushing. This is really Tamara Sims, who in fact originated this discussion with CalSTRS and was unable to be here, and I'm here on her behalf. But the Sightlines project's been running for how long now? A couple of years?
Yeah, since February 2016. So that's when the center launched the project. Do you want me to talk a little
Sure.
bit? So the Sightlines project, just to give you a brief overview, we use 27 metrics to investigate how well Americans are doing in each of the 3 domains. The 3 domains are healthy living, social engagement, and financial security. So in this survey, obviously, we cannot ask people all 27 metrics questions. So we just adopted a few of the Sightlines metrics and modified some of the questions to put in the teacher survey. So we can sort of compare how California teachers are doing compared to the American population. So in the following, we can show you some of
Yeah.
the comparisons.
Yeah, so really the big 3, if you will, of living longer and living longer and living well are healthy behaviors, adopting healthy behaviors, financial security, and social engagement. So this is based on a lot of research in the area, and so the Sightlines project really evaluates Americans primarily. I don't think it's gone out of the country yet, but evaluates Americans on how well they're doing on these particular measures. And so first of all we looked at it. We should actually just talk about. Just before we go into the data on this, one thing we found in terms of social engagement measured in terms of family connections, measured in terms of friends and neighbors, those who reported higher degrees of social engagement measured that way had significantly better feelings about retirement, which we thought was also interesting. So we inserted that.
Right.
So just back to the social engagement. So we looked at teachers again across different cohorts and to see, now one of them was how often they sit. It seems that the 50 to 60-year-olds are sitting the most. Maybe they're board members. That same group is eating the most fruit and vegetable, which is great. But they're sleeping the least. 50 to 60s are sleeping the least. But maybe it's because they're volunteering so much, because they're also volunteering a lot. So that was kind of interesting. So that's what it looks like in terms of the sample. But what we do is we compare that to what we have so far in terms of the Sightlines data. And teachers come out and educators come out very well. So except for sitting, for some reason, the respondents, again, administrators and educators, are sitting a little bit more than the average American. But they have a healthier diet, they're sleeping better, and they're volunteering a whole lot more. So those are interesting indicators across the board, and that's kind of what it looks like. You can see that difference in volunteering is very significant, and the support from close family is identical. And then the sitting, again, a little bit higher.
Are these numbers for active as well as retired?
We put everyone in there. So active and retired, we lumped them together and then compared that group to, so it's true, because once you've stopped working, your lifestyle is going to change a little bit, and that may have obviously a significant impact.
Yeah, just to take one step back, the Sightline project found that Americans are less socially engaged nowadays compared to 20 years ago. And they're less likely to visit their neighbors, to volunteer, to participate in community and the religious organization activities. But we found in the data, the California teachers, compared to American population, they're a lot more likely to volunteer, to engage in their family and friend relationship, to talk with their neighbors and stuff. So that's all good news for our California teachers.
So that summarizes really the key findings for us, and thank you again for allowing us to slot in first and making the schedule flexible.
All right, is there any questions? Sharon?
I'm just curious, and this is maybe off of the research you did here, but I'm always trying to get younger people, younger teachers to be thinking about retirement. And I'm wondering if you can give us advice on how to do that at CalSTRS. Because I jokingly, like on my campus, I'll literally show them those graphs about, if you're 25 and you put $50 in a, 6% index fund or something, what you could have in 40 years. Because I think that kind of stuff, that's how I got a 403B when I was 25. But do you have advice on how we can?
Yeah, it's a big topic, certainly at the Center on Longevity and Laura's research. She's been doing this for quite some time, and I mean, they go so far as you're trying to have a relationship with your future self, which is very difficult, and it's intangible, because you're not a good predictor of your future self and your happiness, et cetera. The center has had very good experimental results from using aged avatars of yourself. So we literally take a photo and we age you. But
Oh, dear.
we try to make you look good, but
Okay.
they age you, and especially for young people, all of a sudden they're seeing themselves. It actually has an impact. Then when they answer questionnaires and survey data, it looks like it has a significant impact on how they're going to think about being financially prepared and a number of other factors as well. So that's an extreme intervention, and it's not something you can do on a daily basis. But I found just using this primer or having that discussion about and also meeting actual people because there's such age segregation. I find that people who actually mix with other generations and older people, that has a huge impact as well. But there's no magic bullet.
I just hear so many faculties say things like, we want to buy stuff, right? We want to buy, so if you're in your 30s or 40s, you want to buy a house or a car, so everything's just immediate gratification, and I totally get that, but it's just, to me, it's that compounded interest is so awesome, over time. And if it's just a little bit at a time, and just convincing them to do just a tiny little bit over a long period. I think that way of thinking psychologically is just very hard to get people over. And I even hear stories about, I have like friends who are cops who got offered to get out of their defined benefit plan so they could get, basically some quick money in their 30s. And I just go like, oh my gosh, don't do it. So just that immediate gratification, I do think there's a psychology around those age groups. I mean, you're in a different time of life, and you need money for, especially in, Los Angeles and San Francisco.
And the problem is when you tell people how long they're going to live, they don't believe you because it's just an average. I tell my kids that if a child born from the year 2000 has a 1 in 2 chance of hitting 100 statistically right now, is what they say, which is but they look at me like I've never even seen a 100-year-old, so I don't believe you, right? They haven't, and it's hard for them to internalize this information. Certainly that's very young people, but again, people don't think it will be them. Correct. Or 40 years. If
No, thank you. That was very interesting research, and I look forward to continuing partnership together.
Great, thank you.
Continue some of this research and find out where.
Here's why, certain things happened.
So we would love to continue the partnership, and we had a little bit of time this morning to discuss that and make plans. So hopefully after the meeting, we'll be talking with each other and looking at what we want to go forward with in the future. I've been taking a few notes on the questions you've been asking, and they're the very topics that we are spending time and effort looking into, and I think that there's opportunity to get some of those questions answered.
Thanks again.
Thank you very much. Elisa, the report we have in ours is separate from this one, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And are you going to cover yours?
We would like to.
Okay, no, I just wanted to make sure because I have a question, but I
Okay.
won't ask it until you actually do that.
Okay.
Thank you very much,
Very good.
Reese.
Thank you for being with
Angela,
us.
thank you.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Good to meet you.
Drive safely. At least that, if not, maybe 25 from January.
We gotta get
So that's.
It's
what-
amazing.
But in
That's
total,
like
weren't there
300.
around
We have over 300 members that are over
Okay.
100.
Good to meet you. Thank you for being here.
Talk soon, yes. It's fun.
Right? So shall we just continue on? And are we okay with time? Okay, very good. All right, so a lot of the things that you have just been hearing fit really nicely with the research that we're doing as well. And I think that there's a nice complement and dovetail. I'll try to point it out as we go along. One thing that we dug into, especially this time with our analysis, is looking at attitudes, those feelings that were being discussed. So hopefully we can shed a little light and see, really our intention is to understand interest in additional research and where we want to go from here. So Dana, you said you had a question about, okay, very good.
Because you might actually answer it.
Perhaps. Okay, so I think many of you know we conduct the retirement readiness assessment once every 2 years. This is a research study that's conducted to evaluate the overall financial status of CalSTRS members. And we ask our members a lot of questions about a lot of different topics, ranging from savings amounts, the amount of debt, what's happening with Social Security for individuals, their insurance coverage, and their attitudes about retirement. In the paper, we followed a lot of trends and looked at changes over time. Tom is the lead researcher on this project. He and I are going to go back and forth and cover some of our findings. Very high level, we're going to touch on that trend data. And then we're going to spend more of our time looking at the deeper research that we've done around demographic data that sheds a little bit of light on some of the questions that were raised earlier, as well as effort that we've made to try to tie our individual pieces of research together, specifically on longevity and adequacy. And with the research program, we're trying to dovetail all that data together to gain a better understanding of our members. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Tom.
Thank you. So I just pulled a couple of the summary findings from the executive summary of the report. Won't go into too much detail about these because there is more detail in the report, but generally we saw that there's greater use of our website offerings for retirement planning. Paying off student loans continues to be an issue, at least for savings for retirement. And certainly it's probably not just specific to teachers, reading a lot about student loan issues amongst everyone. And then borrowing from retirement plans while working in a CalSTRS covered position has gone down, which is good and likely kind of reflects some of the economic prosperity we've been experiencing, I'm sure. So like I said, there's additional details about that in the report, but today we're actually going to talk about the differences between men and women. And just as a quick reminder, we've got 70% of our membership is women, and the other 30% is men. So keep that in the back of your mind as we go through this. And so let's talk first about retirement savings. So what we're able to do is break it down. I'm going to show you the difference in savings between single men, single women, married men, married women, and then we'll go from there. So what we're looking at here is just a simple distribution. Along our horizontal axis, we've got just buckets of savings, 25, 50, 75, et cetera. And then on the y-axis, our vertical axis, we've got a simple count. And so we have the distribution of savings amongst our single females. And it's probably to be expected, kind of tapers into the higher amounts. Single females have an average savings of about $94,000. The mean is it's commonly known as the average. Another measure of central tendency is the median. Median splits your data exactly in half, so half of your people are on one side, the other half on the other. So the median is $32,000 for our single females. Now let's look at the men. So a very similar distribution, looks the same, and in fact they are the same. Same average savings, very same median savings, and when you lump it on top of each other, you can see that it's the same distribution. And then when you actually test it statistically, there is in fact no difference between them, okay? So hold that thought, so we're gonna move on now to...
Can I just, I want to ask a
Yeah.
question about how you're defining savings. Is savings, I have $100,000, or What is,
So the question basically asks,
Savings.
tell us how
So
much you
liquid.
have in household retirement savings.
okay.
So if it's just you, if just you're single, it's everything that you have
So
set aside for.
retirement savings isn't your pension, what you expect to collect in a pension?
No,
or
we
it is-
specified, like a 403B,
Okay.
old 401K, things like that, and then whatever else they have set aside. So it wouldn't be money in CalSTRS. Married females, and kind of understand what's going on here. So they have an average of about 221,000 in savings, median of 103. If we look at men, similar pattern, an average of 195 and a median of 107. And again, if you test these, there is in fact no difference between what married men have in savings and what married women have in savings. So keep that in mind, because from the quantitative savings profile, there is no difference between men and women.
Okay. So that being said, right, retirement savings, no difference between men and women. Now we're going to look at retirement confidence, and this gets into the feeling arena, individuals' attitudes about retirement. And what you saw in the first presentation was that there's some difference in feelings about retirement. And we see it when we look at the data, our data as well. So this slide shows confidence around retirement. And what we did, the question that we asked members, how confident are you that you will have enough money to live comfortably throughout your retirement years? And then individuals responded to this with this confidence scale. We cut the data almost exactly the way Tom was describing for savings, but this time we looked at male and female responses with confidence. And what you see in this slide is the first slide with single males and females, and this slide shows the mean of those confidence ratings. And what you see is that while there's no difference in the amount that males and females are savings, there's quite a difference, a significant difference in terms of ratings of confidence. We went on to look at every slice of the data. So these are the married active members. And again, married males report higher confidence around retirement than married females. And we combined the active population, and no surprise, although it was worth testing, when we combined those very single individuals and married individuals into one pot, again, males are reporting higher confidence in their expectations around retirement. We also looked at retired individuals' ratings, right? So now the individuals have moved from kind of guessing what their situation's going to be like in retirement to living what their situation is in retirement. And the mean overall is higher. Individuals, once they enter retirement, they report higher confidence about being able to live comfortably. And I am guessing, but I believe that we see that number move because people move from the unknown to the known, and they once they see things play out, their confidence goes up. Nonetheless, we still see the same pattern with males reporting higher confidence. And, I've taken maybe 10 slides showing this data, and I think that the important takeaway is, why do we look at this stuff and how can we use the information? We have married a little bit what's published in the literature and what we're seeing in our data. And what we understand from the literature is that confidence is based on both financial knowledge as well as the general level of that people worry about things. And what we see in our data is that in general, women do not feel as confident. And it's useful to know this because as we design our products and services, the question about how do we get people to be better prepared about retirement, it's becoming obvious that the answer to that is we help people prepare in a more individualized manner. So it's not just about telling people, save more, save early, save often. but getting the information salient to them. For women, the things that are very important to know, the information has to be salient. They are interested in hearing the information from other women, and they are interested in having peer-to-peer conversation. So Reese Gwynn talked about his son never having seen a 100-year-old person. So that reality to that young man is, it doesn't mean anything to him. But as we look at trying to move people, right, attitudes contribute to behaviors. It's why we study attitudes. As we look at trying to move people in the right direction, understanding what will help them move is very important.
Lisa, I really appreciate your comments about that, because that's certainly experiences I've heard from anybody. I talk to everyone about retirement savings, you know, in the elevator. But because I think it's so important. I just think it's like we have a crisis. People are not saving enough for retirement, whether teachers or whatever, the engineers, people are just not saving enough. But your comment about the peer-to-peer piece, I have found that to be very true, that people trust me because they see me at school, and it's like, oh, I'll go to Sharon because she's on CalSTRS and she knows stuff about money. And so people will go to people they trust or someone they know. I think the question, and I really appreciate you linking this to like, how do we change things at CalSTRS to make them more effective for our members? I just wonder, how do we translate that experience when we have, you know, so many members, our counselors we have people wanting to get appointments and not able to get them if they're younger. Just issues around, we have a lot of people to serve, and obviously peer-to-peer is very time consuming. And so I know we're doing group counseling, but are there ways we can have that same experience? They trust CalSTRS, they trust people, our staff that work here. So have that connection, but be able to do that on a bigger scale so we meet more members' needs.
So Sandy has a lot of programs in progress, and I believe she's going to be speaking about those. So I don't want to jump the gun on any of that.
We'll wait for Sandy to answer all those.
I will stick with the research side of things, and I will tell you that people on my team were spending effort to look at those individual nuances. How do we reach people of different ages? How do we reach people of different genders? What is appropriate encouragement at different life stages, right? So it might be that when you're young and maybe at the beginning of your professional career, it's really important not to go into debt, so that later, as your salary increases, you're able to save. Not overwhelming people and scaring them so much that they put their head in the sand, right? Figuring that out, we're working on that angle, and we will be looking to you for direction next year, and we're interested in trying to get all of those nuances identified a little better, specifically in relationship to our membership, because while some things we see similar to general publications, there are some things that are unique about our membership.
How much, and I've tried to look for the information in here, but race and ethnicity as it relates to how much people do save or don't save based on, you know, a lot of people don't come from families that had retirements or access to opportunities for retirement. So it's not something that it's common or part of sort of their social composition. And so I think there's something there, and I don't know I don't know that I was able to find what that data looks like, but I think that's also a very important factor as we're looking at this information, because and how we provide that education, right? So I grew up in Mexico. In Mexico, you really, you know, it was very different in terms of retirement. What does that look like? And things obviously have changed, but I think there's something there as well in terms of what that does to a person who's, you know, first graduate, immigrant. So I think the programs that we have may not be, could be, I don't know, but how do we make sure that we take all those things into account as we're creating programs or as we're looking at this data to really better understand our teachers across the state? Because they may not be CalSTRS members for that same reason. paying off debt for students to graduate from college and so on and so forth. And so I'd be interested in knowing a little bit more about that.
So race and ethnicity is on our list of variables that we're interested in looking at. You bring up excellent points in terms of even just frame of reference and role modeling and individual experience. We do not currently collect race and ethnicity on this particular study, but because we haven't looked, that hasn't been part of the study in the past. And we're including that idea. We're also thinking about even region of the state, right? Cost of living is different from area to area, as well as just even life experiences. It's a very diverse state.
Okay, so like Elisa mentioned, what we're trying to do with all of our research is weave it together so that we have a better picture of what's going on with our membership. So I'm going to harken back to two pieces of research we presented over the last year. I presented on retirement income adequacy back in June, and it was specific to pre-1999 retirees. So I'm going to refresh a little bit of that information, and then we're going to merge that with what we've learned from the retirement readiness around income to see if it changes the picture. So some of this will look familiar to a few of you on the Benefits and Services Committee, but I'll refresh what's going on here. So like I said, I had to look at the member-only benefit for pre-1999 retirees. So let you know what you're seeing here. So along the bottom, we've just got buckets of monthly benefit, 500, 1,000, 1,500, 2,000, et cetera. Along our y-axis, just a simple count of everybody that falls into these buckets. And so these gray bars is basically is the distribution of the members who retired before 1999 who are receiving a member-only benefit. I also overlaid that with what's called the normal curve, otherwise known as the bell curve, just to provide a little reference to the shape of this distribution. The normal curve is shaped by a couple of things. This vertical blue line here, this is your average. So it's about 2,600, for instance, for this group. And then you've got one standard deviation. If you remember back to your stats days, that's about 68% of your data. Then two standard deviations out is about 95% of your data. So just reference points. This is a line that I focused on for the sake of the research, what I referred to as the minimum living expense line. Now, this isn't my number. This was actually a number estimated by a professor at MIT, Dr. Laura Glassmeyer. And she went through every state and every county in the country and put an estimate to how much would it cost on a monthly basis to maintain a modest standard of living. And by modest, she meant, you're eating most of your meals at home, preparing them for yourself, one bedroom apartment if you're a single person, that type of thing. So I use this line as somewhat of a measurement benchmark to see what's going on with our membership. And it just points to, in this case, 2240 for last year was that monthly estimate. I also put here, just for reference, the poverty line, because I wanted to make it clear that the red line is not the green line. This green line is not a poverty line. It's kind of a measure of adequacy, if you will. And in fact, it's 2 times the poverty line. So being below the green line doesn't mean you're in poverty, okay? So I just want to make sure that that's clear for a reference point. And then what we determined back in June was that about 36%. So here's the crux of the research. There's 2 important kind of if statements. If the member-only benefit is all this population has, and if they're the only person in their household, maybe 36% have an income less than this green line. I'm going to pause for a second. Everybody okay with the concept? Because we're going to use this going forward and when we start merging with retirement readiness. Okay, so so basically this is saying what do members get as a member-only benefit, and if it's all they get, here's how it relates to a minimum income or minimum expense line. Right, so if it, potentially. So this is a subset of the population, so this is pre-1999 retirees, the specific population that I studied. And again, if all they have is their member-only benefit, and it's just them, because that line moves depending on if you're married and have kids, et cetera, et cetera. So this is the single person line. And again, assumption I made was if they're getting the member-only benefit, maybe it is just them. But it's not always the case, but maybe. Okay? All right, so we're going to hold this concept in thought. So what the retirement readiness allowed us to do is I asked members, what is your annual household income? Okay, so we're going to change the units of measurement just a little bit. Along the bottom now, instead of a monthly benefit amount, we have an annual income amount, 20,000, 40,000, 60,000, 80, et cetera. And obviously I was able to ask them, are you single, married, divorced, widowed, et cetera. So what I did is I took our single, divorced, and widowed, put them into one group, and then compared that to that green line, which is the line for the single person. And if we base it on what they tell us is their annual household income, the number goes from 36% to about 11. So this may be a better approximation of what's going on with our membership based on what they tell us is their household income. Then I also did it for married. The line moves a little bit. It goes from that 27,000-ish a year to 43. Like I said, it's not exactly double because from an economic standpoint, you gain a little bit of efficiency when you're living with somebody else. So these are all the people that told us they're married. This is what they told us was their annual household income. And that number is maybe 7%, about 7% for married couples. Okay, so we're going from that 36 down to 11 to 7 in the case of going from singles to married. And so that's that. So sorry, I jumped ahead a little bit. So then we asked the membership, what is, the question was, please rate the level that your retirement income sufficiently ensures your financial security in retirement. And what we found was, just like with the confidence ratings, the females rated differently than males. What's most interesting about this is I looked at their annual income side by side, and there's no difference in their annual income. But they have different ratings of different perceptions of what that income can do for them. So like we saw with confidence was different in the actives, confidence was different in the retirees. We're seeing the same with a different type of measure, this being sufficiency. Okay, so I'm going to move to longevity now. So back in April, did a follow-up to what Dr. Laura Carstensen said to you, reported to you about her findings on longevity. And so again, we're going to weave in what we've learned from the retirement readiness to what we know about our membership relative to longevity. So this might look familiar, but I'll break it down for you. It's a lot going on here. So across the top, we have employment rate, and it's actually the relative employment rate of those age 50 to 55 versus those age 60 to 65. And along our vertical axis, we have cognitive performance. So when you kind of put it all together, what it's basically showing is countries on the left have an earlier retirement age because more of their 60 to 65s are retired relative to their 50 to 55. So they have a higher relative rate of retirement. So they have an earlier retirement. So the Netherlands, Austria, France, earlier retirement ages. As you move to the right, United States, Switzerland, the United Kingdom have later retirement ages. Put it all together, as you go from left to right diagonally, what it's saying is that the longer you stay in the workforce, the better your performance is on these cognitive tests. So they're suggesting that staying in the workforce longer can actually be good for positive health, mental health outcomes. So let's take a look at our members relative to that. So I asked them, one, do you work for pay in retirement? And then another question asks, do you do regularly scheduled volunteer work? Because in both cases, whether they're getting paid for, or not for it, they're still engaging in kind of a regularly scheduled work type of environment on a regular basis. So a fifth of our members say that they do work in retirement, and then half of our retired members say that they volunteer on a regular basis. So likely doing things that are good for their mental health in general, because they're staying engaged in that work environment. Reese had talked about that social engagement element. There's also just the mental engagement challenges that come with solving problems at work, et cetera. So it looks like at least half of our members are doing something along those lines that could be good for their mental health. And then relative to the work for pay, I asked them why they do it. And I ended up highlighting the right side of the pie chart here. So 22% say they do it for the extra income sake. And then take a look at the purple, the blue, and the orange. This is new that I asked this year. You can see it's to stay mentally active is that 17%, to maintain social connections is 5%, and then 3% to stay physically active. And so I wanted to highlight, because I think we're going to be tracking this over time going forward, Because retirement, as we're seeing, isn't necessarily just about financial preparation anymore. There's a social preparation, there's an emotional preparation, there's a physical preparation. So it'd be interesting to watch the membership, how these attitudes change over time. Happy to take any further questions.
Go back 2 slides, I think, to the chart that you had of the different countries.
So
Yes.
Are there any observations that you have or the researchers had about, so if you look at the countries that are sort of similar age-wise, I think, to the United States. The United States has, sort of an approximate retirement age correlated to, the cognitive performance, but then there are others that are in that same band, I think, retirement age-wise, but that have greater fall-off in cognitive performance, like United States compared to Switzerland,
Situation and
compared to Sweden. Am I interpreting the chart correctly? I wonder if you have any idea why there's that difference in cognitive performance between the countries that I think have retirement age that is approximately the same.
No, I don't have any specific answer for that. This particular research piece, this was a conclusion that he came to, was that generally they're seeing that those that do retire earlier have less of a performance on their cognitive tests versus those who retire later. So it's not always going to be a perfect correlation, but they're seeing enough that there's evidence there that something's going on.
You don't know about the United States versus Sweden or Switzerland?
No.
Okay.
Right. So it's just a correlation line that's drawn, right? And it's the way that each of the countries are clustering up. My best guess is that there are other variables that predict the cognitive performance. There may be some lifestyle things and other things going on. And those are things that we know about our population as well, right? How you live, the healthy choices that you make. It's not just about working, right? There's those other pieces that contribute.
All right, so then I think I'm the last person to ask a question. In the written report on page 46, we have the accumulated supplemental retirement savings. And I have a thought of why I think this is so, but I might be just totally wrong. So I don't even want to say why I think things are happening. So you were talking about active members, voluntary retirement savings in the mean and the median balances in 174,000 and 78,000. But then when you get down into what retirees actually have, which is on page 49, that figure is significantly different. That the median is 268,000, and I think the average is 428,000. How is it that active is so low and that the retired is so high? Do we just have that many young people in the cohort that have not started these things, and then an abnormal number of retirees that have actually saved? That just seems like a huge difference to me. And when you look at how much people as a nation across all employment, how much they save outside of any type of retirement plan they have, it's nowhere near that 428,000 mark. I think it's actually into 5 digits and not, mid-6s. So can you explain that at all?
Yeah, we looked into that as well, and it is age-related. So the bulk of our active membership is basically the 30s to the 50s. But once they start clearing some of those thresholds, then their savings starts ramping up. And you figure it's probably partially lifestyle. If you have children, you've sort of gotten them taken care of and moved on. Maybe you've paid down your mortgage and refinanced, you've cleared up some space there in terms of savings. So it was definitely an age-related type of situation where below the median, we saw a lot of the younger teachers, and then above the median, it started getting into the 50s and the 60s, and their savings really, really ramped based on the cohort averages.
Would you say this is, from these numbers, is that typical of the broader membership?
Of our teachers? Yeah, this is meant to be reflective of our membership.
The whole
Yeah, the
membership?
whole, everybody.
Alrighty, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, I'm sorry. We were just kind of commiserating back here. Alrighty, moving on. Thanks, Elisa, thanks, Tom.
If this is